I'm Margaret Ann Tomashinsky, Executive Director. We're so pleased to have you here. And it's a great privilege to host tonight's talk by Bob Gregson on Josef and Anni Albers. In 1986, the Albers Foundation gave our museum the portfolio of formulation articulation, which Josef Albers worked on during the last years of his life. And I hope you had a chance before you came up to the auditorium to take a look at the selection of prints we've on display in the library this evening. Tonight's talk is sponsored by Connecticut Explorer magazine, and I'm pleased to introduce Mary Donahue, assistant publisher and a great friend of the Elm City history.
Thank you, Margaret Ann. Happy to be here. Sure. Okay. Thank you, Margaret Ann. I'm always happy to be in New Haven. In 2019, the magazine is launching a new feature where we're going to have an initiative where for every issue we're going to have a speaker that will be willing to go out and give some public talks. So we're calling it Connecticut Explored Live. I hope that you've all picked up a copy of this issue downstairs, which has the Albers article that Bob wrote in this our winter issue. We also have coupons that if you fill one out will mail you a spring issue because I'm convinced you'll love it and you'll want to subscribe to it if you look at a couple issues. And we want to thank the New Haven Museum for being our co-host for this initial event. And I'm so excited that all of you braved the rain to get here. So Connecticut Explored, we're the magazine of Connecticut history, but that includes our art history. So those stories that connect Connecticut to the world are the stories that we look for. When we realized that the 100th anniversary of the Bauhaus, one of the most important design schools in the 20th century, was approaching, we knew there was only one person that we had to call, and it was Bob Gregson. Bob is an artist himself. He is a frequent contributor to the magazine, and of course, a modern art and architecture buff. We had Bob author the piece that's in the magazine, and it turns out he has a personal connection he might share with you about one of his first jobs in a New York City art gallery. Bob received his BFA from the Hartford Art School and an MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago. After Hartford Art School, he worked at the renowned Sidney Janis Gallery in New York, where he met Josef and Anni Albers. He is an author, illustrator, of several best-selling books for teachers that mix art and games, and for 22 years, and where I first encountered Bob, he was the creative director for the Connecticut Office of Culture and Tourism. Bob is also a member of the Silver Mine Guild in New Canaan. My pleasure to introduce Bob.
Thank you very much. Is this good to hear me? I guess. Okay. And thank you, Mary and Elizabeth Norman, too, from Connecticut Explored, for arranging for me to be here. And Josef and Anni do welcome you here. I was very thrilled in the 80s to have met Anni Albers several times at her house in Orange. And that was terrific. I even got to speak with her and somewhat interview her, not in any formal way. But anyway, when I was doing whoops, this is it. What did I do, Leo? You knew this would happen. Anyway, the interesting thing was that Anni and Josef are really pioneers, and they're really, in some way, an art power couple. And I kept thinking, there are other art couples that exist. There we are. Okay. Meanwhile, let's see, what can I do here? I can do a soft shoe. But, there we go. Now I just push this button here. And done. All right. I kept thinking that there were other art couples, around. There was, of course, Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, Willem de Kooning and Elaine, his wife, John Tingley and Nikki de Saint-Paul. Where am I doing wrong? This is the terror of doing a presentation. What did I do wrong? I'm pushing. All right. Anyway, there were other couples, Ray and Charles Eames, who were really collaborators. There you go. This is a performance art piece.
It's a very nice flute.
Yes, Joseph would be happy. Joseph selected this flute.
Could you repeat those couples again while we're waiting?
There are the different couples that I was noticing were Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, who was a painter. You have Willem de Kooning and Elaine de Kooning. She was a painter and actually protected his legacy after he died. There was Nikki de Saint-Paul and John Tingley, John Tingley would do those marvelous machines. He did one in the Museum of Modern Art that exploded, and that was the piece. And then Nikki did these very fanciful, voluptuous pieces of art, and they have one at the Pompidou Center in the fountains, where lips are spouting water and all that. But the other couples that I was thinking of too are Ray and Charles Eames, who were really collaborators. I mean, they really worked together. And then you had artists like Klaus Oldenburg or Christo, who with Jean-Claude would work together and they collaborated. But the interesting thing about Annie and Joseph is that Annie was not secondary to Joseph. Annie had a very rich and incredible career. She established herself as an artist on her own turf. Whereas you think of other couples and they share the glory, but these two were very separate in their. Okay, we're almost there. I hope. There we go. We'll go back to. Yes, I know.
We're there.
Yeah, we're there. Now, you just show me which button again. Right, on the circle. No, that's the ones I've been pushing.
Okay.
All right. I should be good.
Don't go away.
Yeah. Anyway, there we go. So we have Jean-Claude and Christo, and we have Klaus Oldenburg and Koji van Bruggen, who they worked together and were collaborated equally in their artwork, whereas Josef and Annie, very separate people. Joseph was born 1888 in a little mining town in Germany, Bottrop. He was on his birth certificate. It says Franz Joseph with a PH, but quickly, I don't know how it was changed or why it was changed. Quickly, they changed it to the F, Josef Albers. His father was a decorative painter. He did faux finishes, faux marbling, and all this stuff, but he was a master at it. He told Joseph he should be a teacher, which he must have known something about him. And they were not very wealthy, but they're middle class. And the other thing that's interesting is that they were Catholic in Germany that was probably helpful later on. Now, Anneliese Elsa Fleischmann was born 11 years later. Very different. She had, her family was very wealthy. Her mother was the heir to a publishing dynasty. Her father owned a furniture manufacturing company. They had servants. Annie never had to cook. I mean, she had art tutors. So she was very, very different. They were also Jewish. The other thing that's interesting is the fact that Annie had two siblings, younger siblings, and they eventually all migrated as a family to the United States. We'll talk about that in a minute. So Annie was wealthy. Josef was not. Annie was Jewish. Josef was Catholic. Now, 1919 is when the Bauhaus was developed. The Weimar government wanted to do a school. They already had a school, an art school, but they wanted to enlarge it, make it very special. It's after World War I. Things are changing. So they asked Walter Gropius, who was a wonderful architect, to be the head of the school. So he developed this school, a school that was going to be a totally new idea. It was, let's see if I got there. It was a school that was about combining the arts. It wasn't it wasn't a school where you would be learning little a-tempera painting and doing all these little things. This was about ideas. And so he selected a lot of incredible people. And then in this photograph, these are the faculty. You have Josef over there on the left. About the man with the cap and the glasses is Maholy Naj. You have in the back is Paul Klee. You have Gropius. You have Marcel Breuer. You have Kandinsky. No, this is Paul Klee. Excuse me. This is Paul. That was Oscar Schlemmer. Anyway, so we've got these incredible people who came and taught at this school. Paul Klee. Everyone loved Paul Klee. He was magic. He could play the violin. He was a great cook. Herbert Bayer was a wonderful graphic designer. He designed type fonts. He designed a whole new way of creating graphics. Marcel Breuer, of course, and his claim to fame, I guess, in the school was he got a bicycle and was inspired by the handlebars to create tubular furniture. So he created the first tubular furniture ever. Mies van der Rohe was the third director of the Bauhaus. Maholy Naj, of course, is a filmmaker and photographer and sculptor. Janty Sawinski was a very, you could tell that he was a very mischievous kind of guy. He was a painter and graphic designer. Oscar Schlemmer was funny. He was a theater person and a sculptor. And I'll show you in just a minute some things he did. And then obviously Kandinsky. And Kandinsky was not very successful, believe it or not, until after he died. Which is probably the way it's going. The workshops. This was not a school of classes. This was a school of workshops. There were a few classes. But this was a school where you would select a workshop, and then the teachers would come in and out, and the students would come in and out. And it was a way to take all these arts and collectively put them together. Even the syllabus was an outrageous kind of circle. So there were all these different things that you could do, and And this was the stage class. This is the Oscar Schlemmer. You know, Cirque du Soleil, be careful. And this is wonderful. If you ever go online and go onto YouTube, you'll see these ballets with these people turning, and this person with the fringe spins around, and the fringe goes out. And it's a lot of fun. And this is in color. So it was a creative, unbelievably creative time. Joseph, as a student, did not paint. He was very poor. He went out and he collected glass pieces. He would take his backpack and he would go out and find broken bottles, and he'd make these glass pieces. Eventually he made, this is a sandblasted glass piece, but he'd make these pieces that would be illuminated in the back. You could hang them on the wall. But as I said, you did a lot. You just didn't do one thing. Joseph designed objects. There's a fruit bowl. Designed tables, chairs, and he also did photography. This is pictures of Oscar Schlemmer. And he would do these collages, and he did these collages throughout his life. So he did a lot of different things. Annie came to the Bauhaus in 1922, and she said to me that she had tried twice to get in. The second time she got in, there were 16 people, and 4 got in, and she was able to get in. She was very, I don't want to say stubborn, but she was rebellious. And she did not want to go to a Beaux-Arts school. She told her father she didn't want to do that. She said to me, I didn't want to do doodling. That's how she went doodling. So but she came into this and she looked at all those classes and she said, I don't want to do the metal sculpture with the pointy metal, and I don't want to go up on the ladders for the mural. I better do weaving, even though she thought weaving was for sissies. That's her statement. But she did that, and I love these pictures of they're so art school, aren't they? I love that. Anyway, so Annie's weaving, Joseph's making glass pieces, and Weimar, the Bauhaus of Weimar, the government funded it, decided it's not making money, it's not doing well. We're going to take our building back and buy Bauhaus. So Dessau decided, well, we'll do it. We're going to give you a plot of land outside of Berlin, and you can build the Bauhaus. We'll pay for it. And what a great opportunity for Walter Gropius, who was not only the director of Bauhaus and knew the entire scope of what was needed, but then became the architect. So he knew the program intimately. It's a wonderful school. This is all workshops in this building. There's a dormitory over there. There's some other types of classrooms over farther building in the back. There's theaters, there are offices. So it's a very, it's a cool building, and I have not seen it personally. I would love to do that. So they met in 1922, and Annie, this is very fascinating, because this is what Annie told me. She says, he was a co-student, an older student. And as in many schools, you have admiration for the older students, sometimes more than the teacher even. And so we gradually met, and I showed him a lot of what I was doing, and we took a walk, and we developed a relationship gradually. So those are Annie's words about them. And you can see them there on the dormitory balcony together. And there's that Wassily chair, the chair that Marcel Breuer designed. He named it after Kandinsky. And so he had, the Albers have several prototypes. Now, Joseph became a teacher. And that's very, not usually that did not happen at the Bauhaus. But he was such a good student and teacher that he made teachers. And all the teachers did not live in the dormitory. There were 4 buildings that were for teachers, for teacher housing or master's housing. The upper right hand is Annie and Joseph's house with the Wasley chairs and furniture designed by Joseph and his glass pieces on the wall. She thought it was terrific. She thought living there was the best. But not everybody liked it. Nina Kandinsky would complain. She wanted a Russian stove. Mrs. Muka wanted a certain type of electric stove. Gropius' wife said, well, the Bauhaus should design a stove. And Paul Klee, who was a good cook, said, I just want to cook on gas. So that was, so Joseph continued to teach, and he was a marvelous teacher. And there's, as I say, it wasn't a Beaux-Arts curriculum. He was teaching concepts, ideas, ways of thinking, ways of seeing. This was a class on with just using paper. And look at all those polite art students back there. Annie, on the other hand, was starting to like weaving. She was starting to get into it, and she started to do some very interesting pieces. And so she was starting to be happy, and Joseph was happy doing his work. And then, of course, the Nazis. In 1933, the Nazis closed the Bauhaus. They thought it was degenerate art. They did not like it. Those, by the way, those are down at the bottom are students, Bauhaus students, protesting. And this is, I think, about 1945 when Berlin was bombed. The Bauhaus was damaged. But they closed the Bauhaus. Actually, Mies van der Rohe wanted to open up one in Berlin in a factory, but that did not really work. So you had all these teachers, all these people who were now out of work and were going to be scattered to around the world. And you have Walter Gropius going off to Harvard with Marcel Breuer, and you have Moholy-Nagy opening the Bauhaus in Chicago. And Annie and Joseph went back to Charlottenburg and were kind of trying to figure out what to do next. Well, what to do next came to them. Philip Johnson was working at the Museum of Modern Art, along with a fellow named Eddie Warburg, who was from the financial family. They're wealthy guys, so they didn't have to take any salary. Early on, the museum was just run by a lot of wealthy, educated guys. But Philip was doing a show on international architecture, international style architecture. It was in Europe, it was in Germany, and was looking at the buildings. Annie and Joseph invited him to tea, and they were good friends. He got back to New York, and Eddie Warburg, who was helping to develop a school in North Carolina, said to Joseph, I need teachers. You know any art teachers? And he says, I guess I do. Yes, I do. So he said, Annie and Joseph are available. And immediately Eddie paid for their voyage, paid for the trip, all of their expenses, and they were brought to North Carolina. And they had no idea where North Carolina was. But there they were. And it's so interesting to see this because they went through the Bauhaus, and it was an innovative, pioneering school. Now they're in North Carolina at Black Mountain College, which is another innovative, pioneering school. Very different cultures, though. The Bauhaus was about a new culture that Germany and all of that. They had a well-entrenched culture, One came, they needed a new life. This is America, and we're inventing culture here. So it was an interesting, two different interesting ways in which these two work side by side. The school was in North Carolina. Where's North Carolina? It's the Bible Belt. It's the middle of a very conservative area. And you've got these wild artists doing interesting things. So the school is on 166 acres. Again, like the Bauhaus, they leased an old college that was defunct, so they had a building. And they hired Annie and Josef. They said, Josef, you can do whatever you want for the art department. One little problem. Josef didn't speak English. So he had a hard time. He had to learn English pretty fast. And so you can see the playfulness of people, and you said, that's Walter Gropius, by the way, the guy in the bow tie. I'm going to push a button. Let's make sure that it works. There we go. So Annie is doing the weaving, is in the weaving department. And Josef is now relying a lot on his performance and visual way of communicating, because his language skills are not the best. So, but Josef was amazing. I mean, he knew people. He brought people in. How he knew all these people, I don't know. And these are people before they were famous. Merce Cunningham. You've got Bucky Fuller. Franz Klein, the painter. Ben Shawn, who was the social realist painter, was probably well known. Robert Motherwell, John Cage, music, and Ilya Bolotowski and Willem de Kooning. These are some of the people that were teaching there, and it was an interesting school. There were people, like the Bauhaus, they had workshops, not really classes. And so people would be making geodesic domes. In the painting workshop, people were painting. And there were social events because they were their own little community. There were happenings. Happenings started here. So it was really the first time things were starting to happen. And it greatly affected a lot of artists who came to light in the 60s. And we have Rauschenberg, we have Kenneth Nolan, and they didn't like Josef that much. They thought he was very autocratic and very difficult to as a teacher. Although Rauschenberg said later on how important Albers was to his work. So, you've got Black Mountain College, and there was a lot of, like any place, there's a lot of politics, a lot of controversy. And at this point, also at Black Mountain College, I think maybe in the spirit of America or whatever, but Josef was doing a lot of flirting, and he was. So it was a very different time, very different place for them. Just like the Bauhaus, they had to move out of that college building, and so they built another building. It was originally designed by Breuer and Gropius, but it was too expensive, so Lawrence Coker, an architect I don't know very well, designed this new space. That's a model on the upper left, and obviously they had only money for one spoke of that. So oh well. Now, also Annie did marvelous things. I don't know how many people have seen these wonderful pieces. She went to, and there are more of them, she went to a hardware store and made jewelry. So you've got this wonderful thing with bobby pins, and which we have someone with the bobby pin jewelry on here. Cost a fortune. That was Annie. Annie picked those bobby pins. And we have a drainer and paper clips. And it's very exotic looking. I love this jewelry. Well, things were not going so well. By the late 40s, again, I think the energy was waning, the money was waning. The trustees of the college said, we have to be much more conventional, we have to have classes, we can't do this. So Annie and Josef said, well, I guess our time is up, we're leaving. And they left, and in 1949 was one of these pivotal years in their life. They loved Mexico. They had been taking trips to Mexico already. Actually, they took 14 trips in there while they were married. And they collected pre-Columbian art. Some of you may have seen the exhibit at Yale recently of their collection. And Josef would take photos of the Mayan temples and the ruins, and he would make his collages. And you understand this when you see their work. You see that spirit. They weren't copying, but this was already in their soul. This was part of the way they saw things. Well, 1949, Josef is out around the country doing residencies at different art schools. Philip Johnson calls Annie and says, Annie, I'd like to do a show on textiles. What do you think? And she goes, well, I guess. And she gets the first show, I don't know if it's the first woman show, but it's the first show of textiles at the Museum of Modern Art, which is a wonderful punch in her arm that she got to do. She got to do this. So she was now well known. She was it when it came to textile design and modern design. Well, 1950 comes, and Josef comes to Yale. Now, I don't know how many people in this room were at Yale or taught by Josef Albers. Anybody here taught by Josef Albers? We've got one person over here. So there, and I wish I could have been there to see him teaching. By the way, I love this obelisk or whatever it is, and it's got the Albers stamped into it. I guess there were various teachers who were part of the school. Josef, I think it is said because his English was not the best, although he was getting better, he was very physical when he was teaching. Is that true? I think he was. Yeah. And because I saw a film on YouTube, silent film of him teaching. He's waving his hands. He is performing. He was like a performance artist. And I would have loved to be in that class because his idea was perception. I mean, we see things one way, but he liked to challenge the way we saw things. Anyway, he kind of reminds me of Vince Scully, running around with his pointer. And the great thing about Josef was his interaction with color. And for those of you who don't understand what that is, these are two projects that were done. This project over here is two colors looking like one color. So by changing the background color, your eye mixes the colors so they look the same. Maybe not on the slide, but they do. And then these X's are the same color, so you're looking at one color looking like two colors. So that's just one of his samples of what he did. So it was mixing color by your eye that was fascinating to Josef. About this time, he started his homage to the squares. And one of the things that I, again, will go back to Annie, because I love what she said. I'm kind of surprised. She said, Josef called these platters of color. Annie said, I was surprised that these squares were interesting to people, because I couldn't understand it at first. Sometimes you don't see it. It takes an outsider when you are so close. So she didn't get it at first. Obviously she did eventually. But, the interesting thing about this was that he came upon the idea of a format that could be a grid or a structure to hang the idea of color. And, as you saw the downstairs, no matter what you see, it's not the format that's important, it's how the color is expressed that is important, and it's endless as you change, as the colors change. One of the things that Josef did on his paintings, at least, is that he would write down absolutely everything about the paint on the back. He did, because he never mixed colors. Those are not mixed, those are directly out of the tube. So what he would do is that he would show you the color and the company, and so you could, if you were a conservator, you could find the right color or whatever. So that I found very interesting, this recipe. He, as you saw before, he was doing tables, he was doing chairs. And this is at Yale, obviously, if you've seen it at the architecture school. He did a whole series of things called constellations. And the interesting thing about this is that with color, you were mixing color, with your, through your perception. This one, I love the way he, oops, I'm going to follow. This angle comes out at you, or that one comes out at you. So he has these things that, they're almost impossible structures. So, now, some of you probably remember the Grand Central Terminal before there was a Pan Am building. But when there was a Pan Am building, it was designed by Walter Gropius, and it's nice to have friends in high places because Walter asked Josef to do a mural. So he wanted to do, he was going to do his constellations because he thought it would be cool to connect to the ceiling of the terminal. But Gropius wanted this piece, and it was one of the sandblasted glass pieces, but he reworked it, enlarged it, and he made it out of Formica. So, that was 1963. He got $1,000 for this. Yeah, he got $1,000. Hopefully he didn't pay for the installation. In 2000, I guess MetLife bought the building. Goodbye mural. So it is in a landfill in Ohio. So I guess this is a lesson to all of us. I don't know.
It can be redone.
Oh, it can be redone. Yeah, it can be redone. So don't worry, anyone. He designed album covers. There's a whole bunch of album covers. He did these jazz covers, and they look jazzy, don't they? I love the way they look. He did cards. He did books. He did all sorts of things. While he was at Yale, he got to be friends with an architect named King Louis Wu. And King Louis Wu was a very interesting architect. He did a lot of houses and a lot of little buildings around New Haven. And he asked Josef to do, if he would work on some fireplaces for him. So Josef designed, these are maquettes at the top there, on top right. And he designed, this is a fireplace at a house in North Haven, the Rouse House. And the other thing I love about this is the house is square, and it's got a square within a square. Anyway, that's just my thing. In fact, that fireplace was reproduced in total at the Cooper Hewitt when Annie and Josef had a show of their decorative arts. And there's another fireplace in Woodbridge, in another house. But he also did churches and different things, but those are the ones that are close by. This one is the secret one. This is a secret society, and the manuscript. You can see. Can you see Joseph's? Can you see what Josef did there? Yeah. There it is. You can see it much better. That circle. That was the secret society, and that was the symbol. Was that he just? They just colored the grout.
Order.
So anyway, that's a King Louis Wu building, by the way. As he taught, he had famous students. Eva Hess, Richard Serra, Julian Stanzik, Richard Anaskevich, and many students. They were all becoming very famous and very wealthy. But the Albers were not wealthy. They lived very simply, and Albers was not a world famous person back in the 50s and the 60s, although things started to change for him. He did get a show. Henry Gelzeller got him a show at the Met, so he had a one-person show at the Met. But the thing that put him on the map was participating in the Museum of Modern Art in the Responsive Eye, which was a show of op art, color field painting. So it had Vazzarelli, it had Bridget Riley, there were a whole bunch of people that you may or may not know. But Josef was the old master. Everybody started to realize he's been doing this forever. And these young guys were coming along. So he became very famous, but he hated the idea of being called an op artist or a color, or a minimalist. Anyway, things were starting to happen. This was, you saw formulation, articulation downstairs, which was a wonderful portfolio. It's a kind of a mini diary of his career. This is a thing called Interaction of Color, using the projects of students, and he did a whole book about that. In 1970, I had just graduated from Hartford Art School, and I got a job at the Sidney Janis Gallery. And the first thing I did was I hung a show of Josef Albers' work. That was what I had to do first. And so those were all hung by me. And I had done there were these smaller paintings, only $2,500 for these small paintings. And I hung them as carefully as I could across the wall. And I was standing there, and Sidney Janis, who was semi-retired, came out, and he gruffly looked at them, and he said, "They're too low. Hang them higher. People are not as short as you and I." So I said, "Okay," and I hung them high. So there they were, high above. So the opening happened, and people are milling about, and all of a sudden the doors slide open, and there's Josef in his gray flannel suit and gray shirt buttoned to the top, and his hair gray, and his clear glasses, and Annie all in beiges and browns, and they come out, and they're this big. They're tiny. So we're all looking up at the paintings. But I briefly got to say hello to Josef and Annie at that point. And so that was kind of a thrill to do that. And but I also got to meet Annie in the 80s a couple of times. In 1970, Annie decided not to do weaving anymore. She wanted to do printmaking. Weaving was just too laborious. It took too much time. And she was in her mid-70s, and she wanted to do something that was a little bit more spontaneous. At this point, Nicholas Fox Weber, who is now the director of the foundation, Albers Foundation, who is a great scholar and writer and historian, was working with them, and his family had a printing business, probably Fox Printing, I'm assuming. Anyway, he helped Annie do the first prints that she got to do. And then Josef was doing some prints at Tamarind, which is a place where people would do prints, and they asked her to do some prints. And so she was hooked. She started doing prints. And this is these are some prints. This one on the right is very interesting. This is from her own little biography of 9 prints called Connections. And so there are 9 prints throughout her career. And I love this one. This is on my wall, and I love this because she said to me, she says, I did this for a psychiatrist. He wanted to do a hooked rug. And so I made this for him. He said, I want to do a hooked rug while I'm working. So he did it, and then he called me, and he said, Annie, I'm done with the hooked rug. Would you like to see it? And And she said, and you know what I said? And I looked at her and I said, Annie, what did you say? And she goes, I said no. Little grin on her face. So that was Annie. She was really quite something. And, I remember walking on her doing the print. She goes, wash your hands. So I do, wash. No. Very neat. Now, this is interesting because this is their personal life. They moved to New Haven. And you'd think, Bauhaus, you want a nice sleek building, flat roof. They bought a Cape Cod. This was their house. Very humble, very simple. Although, if you notice, it's all painted white. And there are no bushes. And there's these metal railings. And so, you know, there's something they tinkered with here. But they lived in this house. And but, you know, they started to get more money. They started to be wealthy. So they could move to a much more lavish house. So you know where they moved to? Orange, Connecticut. Raised Ranch. That was their house. And what's interesting is that they lived very simply. They kind of liked this idea of mass production and, you know. But there's a little car up there, say Mercedes-Benz. That was their luxury. They wanted to have that Mercedes. Because they would go to the post road. They would drive the car on the post road. This is a house I visited. So it's all white. Living room, obviously, is that upstairs. And then there's her bedroom, her studio, garage. And anyway, so it was all white. And I thought, oh, these are going to probably be chairs by Florence Knoll. She bought those at Sears Roebuck. They loved this. Anyway, let's see here. And there's the kitchen, all white. That's her in New Haven, but this is her orange kitchen. And this is her house in Orange with the Wassily chairs, still with the Wassily chairs. Remember, she was not a terrific cook. Every time I read something, people are always making comments because she grew up with cooks. Anyway, her bedroom in Orange, very, very simple. That's her bedroom in the master's house in Dessau. And one of the cute things about this is that you cannot see it, but there's a little statue there. And it is right there. Joseph gave that statue to her. It's kind of an Egyptian thing in 1923. So you've got this very simple house, very simple life, but you have these incredible people coming to visit. You have Lord Snowdon coming and taking photographs. Cartier-Bresson coming to take photographs. Hans Nemeth is coming to take photographs. You've got Henry Gelseller coming, to do shows. You had Jackie Onassis, Kennedy Onassis coming, and you had Maximilian Schell, who was a great friend of the Albers. And he's the great filmmaker. Actually, Maximilian Schell, there's a film he did called Marlene. It's about Marlene Dietrich. She's not in it. I mean, she's in it in her old films, but she is speaking in it. And actually, Annie is in the film somewhere, and she gets a film credit, which I find fun. So Joseph died in 1976, and Annie stayed on till 1994. So she's about 94 when she died. That's an Erwin Hauer sculpture, by the way. Just in case anyone cares. After Joseph died, Annie had a rich career. I mean, she went to London and got a degree at the Royal Academy of Arts. She opened the Joseph Albers Museum in Bottrop. She had her own show at the Redwick Gallery. So she had an incredible career, as well as working on Joseph's legacy. The Albers Foundation was put into effect in 1971, I believe, and Nicholas Fox Weber is the down there on the right is the director. But there's Annie with her brother and sister, and the Albers Foundation was paid for by reparations from Germany. They got money back, and that paid for that building. It's designed by Tim Prentice, who was a student, architecture art student of Joseph's. So that's a marvelous place, and anyone, if you should visit it, you should call, see if you could visit it. It's a really. Josef and Anni are buried in Orange, and just like they were, they each got their own headstone. No sharing of headstones. So they got their own headstone, and the other thing that's interesting, and they did this early on, is that you see those other headstones, they're all facing in a different direction. Annie's and Joseph's headstone faced the driveway, so that you could come in and see them and then drive away. And they did that on purpose because they said, well, if one of us dies and we have to go to the post office or something, we'll come by and we can drive. Very practical, very practical. So that was Annie. That was Annie and Joseph. So in general, I think there's so much more. I mean, you've got these two incredible people, two inventive, smart people who are unassuming, living right here under our noses in a raised ranch, and who knew everybody in the world, it seemed. I mean, through the Bauhaus and through Black Mountain College. So, I think that we're fortunate to. We shouldn't take them for granted while we're here. So thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take some. Any questions?
What did his students say about him? Was he wonderfully eccentric, very knowledgeable, eloquent, or to the contrary?
Well, we have one of the students here who probably knew. And I would assume you can answer that.
My color teacher,
Sorry, hold on.
Thank you.
My color teacher, colorist, was Auguste Madrigal, and he studied with Joseph. And so he was as eccentric as I imagine Joseph to be, and told many stories. And it was lots of fun. And we did all of the square with color aid packs. And then we mixed the colors ourselves. Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, good. Yeah, I did those colorated papers. By the way, when Joseph took over the Yale Art School, a lot of teachers left. And one of the teachers that left was Rudy Zallinger, and Rudy became my teacher. He taught at Harvard Art School. It was great. He's the one who did the mural, the Peabody mural. So, great man. Love Rudy. But anyway, any other? Yes?
Just make a comment. I don't need to correct you, but if you like,
Yes, correct me.
Dessau.
Dessau. And vinyl. Sorry.
Just then you said Quadro.
Yes. I know. Yeah, I know. Joseph and I share this problem with English. So, any other questions? Yes.
can we hear from the gentleman behind me who was a student?
Well, if the gentleman wants to say something, do you want to say anything? Would you say something?
Thank you.
Yeah. You'll come.
I was in his freehand drawing class in 1954. For the first semester. The second semester, he was sent to Switzerland, I think to open a school or something by the State Department. Anyway, he taught freehand drawing. And he would go up to the blackboard and talking to the class, he would draw a perfect 45-degree angle. And he'd say, I don't do the accent. You know how you do this? He said, you imagine this line and this line being equal, and you can do the 45. He started off the class writing his name. He wrote his name up on the blackboard, and he said, can you all do this? Can any of you write this backwards? And the student got up and he said, Charles, you can do that? And Charles said, yeah, I can do that. So he wrote his name backwards, and he said, Charles, can you write your name upside down? And Charles said, no. Sit down, Charles. He said, can you write your name upside down backwards? When you all go home, try that. It's so easy to write your name upside down backwards. But other people in the class, he would go over to the class and see what they were doing and everything, and he would pick out the young ladies and he would it never came to us.
I heard you. Annie, a bit, okay. So, well, that's great. And you have your assignment now. All right, well, if there's any other questions?
Is the house still standing, and are there people in it who are aware of it?
The house is still standing. I don't know if the people are aware of the history, but they are intimidated when you drive by. But it isn't their house. Yes?
Is the first house in New Haven?
It says in New Haven, but I don't know.
I think it's in
Yes?
Say a little something about the name itself, about me. People hear me, know about it.
Oh, the foundation?
Yeah.
I don't know everything. I know it's got the collection of all the Albers works. They organize shows from there. They have places for artist residents to be there, and you can go there. It's kind of a research library. You can go there. So.
You can get there by calling them and asking for the
All right, one more. You can't drop it now. You have to make it. All right, you're free.